Good afternoon and welcome to the first Dementia Australia webinar for 2023. My name's Gary O'Toole and I'm the National Consultancy Lead at the Centre for Dementia Learning. I'd like to begin just by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past and present, and to our shared futures. So the topic for today's webinar is Rethinking Changed Behaviours, and I'll introduce our panellists in a moment. But I just wanted to say a couple of things to open the discussion, I suppose. And although we're talking about rethinking changed behaviours, in some ways what I'd like to suggest is that in fact what we need to do is to return or to go back to some old ways of thinking. And I'm particularly have in mind Tom Kitwood, and some of you will be familiar with Tom Kitwood, who was a British clinical psychologist who in the 1990s revolutionised the way we think about dementia care and dementia support. And one of the main messages, or certainly for me the main messages that I received from Tom Kitwood by reading his various books and publications, was that shift away from a medical model of viewing people living with dementia towards what we now call a person-centred approach, or perhaps a more modern term that we use these days is a strength-based approach. And I think we've generally, as a community and as particularly as the aged care approach, have been quite successful in making that shift away from a medical model to a more person-centred model. It's become part of the way we do things, part of the culture of care, if you like. I'm not so sure if we've been quite so successful in shifting our approach to responding to changes in people's behaviours. I think we still sometimes, or there's still sometimes a tendency for us to view changes in behaviour through an almost unconscious medical model. And just as one example of that, we've seen in the last couple of years an enormous resurgence in the debate that still continues today about the language that we use for changes in behaviour. When I've been around a long time, we talked about challenging behaviours, behaviours of concern. Within the research and medical areas, they talk about behavioural and psychological symptoms of dementia. These days we speak perhaps a little bit more around responsive behaviours or change behaviours or just behaviours. So that the fact that we're still debating, and sometimes quite ferociously, the language that we use, I think points to that fact that we haven't quite made that transition to a truly person-centred or strength-based approach to responsive changes in people's behaviours. We still talk about managing behaviours. We still talk about problem solving when people with dementia exhibit a change in their behaviour. So how do we return to a truly person-centred approach to supporting people who live with dementia and who experience changes in their behaviour? How do we move to that more strength-based approach? And for me, the question that comes up when I reflect on this is, how do we shift our focus so that we start to see behavioural changes, again, whatever language we want to use, as a strength, not as a problem to be managed, but a real strength that the person with dementia is exhibiting, something that we can utilise to really focus in on what's important for that person. How can we actually support them to live their best life possible? I've worked in the dementia area for nearly 30 years now, and I frequently think about what might happen should I be diagnosed with dementia. And one of the things that we all know happens for probably the majority of people with a diagnosis of dementia is that at a certain stage in their journey, if you like, with dementia, that they will have challenges associated with verbal communication. Verbal communication becomes difficult. I might have difficulty finding the right words. I might have difficulty putting a sentence together in a way that's meaningful to other people. I might have difficulty engaging in conversation at a speed that most people expect from me. And then the question arises is how, if I'm having these difficulties with verbal communication, how am I going to communicate to you, those people who are offering me support, what my needs are, what my emotions are, what my state of being is at a particular time? How am I going to tell you if I'm in pain, if I'm feeling lost, if I'm frightened, if I'm bored, if I'm overstimulated or overwhelmed, if I'm lonely and missing people who are meaningful in my life? It might be, and I think it often is, that the only way, or one of the only ways, that I can get my message through to you, across to you, is through my behaviours, certainly my facial expressions and body language, and those sorts of changes are really important. But it's through my behaviour, through what I do and where I am and where I want to be, that I'm communicating probably 24 hours a day to you about what's important to me right now, what I'm missing. And again, in the more formal literature, we talk a lot about unmet needs. So what are my unmet needs and how do I communicate those things? I'm a bit of a pacer. Particularly if I'm a little bit anxious, I wander. And I can see in my care plan that somebody's going to write, Gary's wandering again. And it might get a little bit more serious than that, because Gary might in fact be intrusive. Not only is he wandering, but he's wandering into places where he shouldn't be. And as a result of that, he might be causing distress to other people in my family. If I'm living in a residential aged care facility, it might be other residents or staff. My behaviour is a problem. But maybe, just maybe, what I'm desperately trying to communicate to you is that I'm searching for something that's familiar, because your facility, even my own home, doesn't look familiar to me anymore. I'm desperately searching for somewhere where I feel safe, where I feel secure, where I can rest. Maybe I'm looking for somewhere where I can be useful, because you people in the providing care are so kind to me. You do everything for me. But I've lived my whole life, perhaps, caring for other people in one way or other. It may be my family, it may be my pets, it may be my students or my colleagues. And I need to find those people so that I can communicate and express that really essential aspect of who I am as a person. Maybe I'm looking for a home-like environment. We talk about that in residential aged care all the time. An interesting topic. We could have a whole whole day's discussion on what does that look like? What is home like? But again, perhaps my wandering is an expression of that unmet need to feel safe. Maybe I'm looking for my children, for my lover, for my dog, for my friends. And it's an interesting point to, I suppose, to stop and reflect that how does that shift in perspective from seeing my wandering as a risk or seeing my wandering as a problem to seeing or perceiving my wandering as that communication of a really deep, profound human need to be acknowledged, to be useful, to be considered. From seeing a problem that needs to be solved or managed to seeing a person through the eyes of compassion. I need support. I need you to listen to my behaviours and to manage me, but manage my need, not my behaviour. Listen to what I'm telling you through my behaviours. And I can imagine that many people are sitting there thinking, isn't that wonderful? That's such a beautiful, compassionate, lovely way of thinking about some of those changes in behaviour, some of those communications that we see in people with dementia that we support. But how, I was going to swear, how the hell do we do that? When we're busy, when we're short-staffed, when perhaps we don't have all of the information about Gary that we need in order to be able to understand what he's trying to communicate to us. And at Dementia Australia and the Centre for Dementia Learning, we developed a number of years ago now an approach that we call an approach to problem solving. Again, problematic language, but it's a way of thinking. An approach to looking at what's behind some of those changes in behaviour or behaviours that we see in those people we support who have dementia. And that's called the CAUSE model. I'm not going to spend very much time talking about it, but it's CAUSE small d. So it's a way of thinking systematically about what might be the triggers or what might be behind a particular responsive behaviour, change behaviour in somebody living with dementia. The C stands for communication. Is there something going on in the communication between myself and the person with dementia that may be triggering this change behaviour? Perhaps it's the activity that we're engaging in. There's something about that activity that causes the person with dementia distress or stress. Excuse me. Perhaps it's an unmet need, and the classic unmet need, and there's really good research, Australian research to support this, the classic unmet need is pain. I'm in pain and you're not noticing that, you're not managing my pain. Is it my story? Have I been a dairy farmer for the last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years? 3 o'clock in the morning is not the middle of the night as far as I'm concerned. It's when the day starts. Perhaps it's to do with the environment, the physical environment that I am in that is not enabling. And only when we've worked through the CAUSED, communication, activity, unmet need, story and the environment, if it's none of those things, then we shift into the medical model. Maybe then it's to do with my dementia, with changes in parts of my brain that actually produce, in a fairly direct way, some of these responsive behaviours. And what we found is that caused approach is a really useful, simple, straightforward, practical way of supporting aged care workers and families to listen to the behaviour of people with dementia and to see and to search behind the behaviour to see what that behaviour perhaps is communicating. And when I was first introduced to that approach, I suddenly began to see the behaviours of people with dementia as a strength. Behaviour is communication, and our job is to try and ascertain what the person with dementia is communicating to me, to the world, to other people. I'm communicating, as I said at the opening part of our discussion, my mood, my feelings, my state of being, my hopes, my fears. I'm communicating the very heart, the essence of who I am. And I don't want you to manage my behaviours, and I certainly don't want you to get rid of my behaviours. I want you to listen to them, because if I don't have my behaviours, how do I communicate? How do I tell you what's happening? So that's just a couple of short reflections on change behaviours and different ways that we might be able to approach those behaviours in the future, so that we are responding to the person who is in front of us, who has those change behaviours. What I might do now is that I'll introduce our first guest for today, and that's Lois Eastgate. Lois is one of the facilitators at the Centre for Dementia Learning, has a vast experience in dementia and in supporting people living with dementia, but also supporting workers, people whose job it is to support people with dementia. And Lois has been involved in a program over the last couple of years to develop a mentoring education program based on the CAUSE model. And I just asked Lois if she could tell us a little bit about the development of that program and what were the motivation behind the program, and some of your experiences of actually rolling that program out to aged care workers. Lois.
Thanks, Gary. So over the years, we've been developing a short 3-hour program to aged care staff, community staff, hospital staff, looking at why it is that people living with dementia do experience behaviour change. And people always have found this a really useful session, help them to look at the process of what does the communication, as Gary said, that this person is presenting or giving to us actually mean. But there was always feedback that said, you know, this was great now, but how do we actually put this in practice when we go back to work? And often staff would say, look, I don't think we've got the time. I don't think our organisation can support what you're telling us. It's all very well for you to say, look, take the time and then get to know the person, but what if we don't have that time? So I guess over the years of delivering that and thinking about it, we've been trying to work out what the best way would be to be able to support staff to take knowledge and actually put it into practice in their workplace. And so that really was the motivator behind thinking about how we could expand on what we've been doing. And we've called this new program Understanding Behaviour Changes Mentoring Program, because we wanted the focus to be more about supporting staff to go back to work, to put into practice what they were learning, with a staff member from our organisation walking beside them over a number of sessions so that they could come back with questions or think through what they've been told and think about that in the context of their workplace. So we've been delivering this now for over a year and a half, and we've structured it so that it can be used in residential care, community care, day respite, and potentially could be adapted for long-term acute care settings. It's a program that we've delivered face-to-face and via virtual classrooms, and the essence of it is that we work with an organisation who identifies through a process of conversation with staff, up to 20 key staff who'll attend the program, go through the learnings and then work in their workplaces to help other people follow through on embedding the concept that if we understand people and know them well enough, we will be able to prevent behaviour changes, or if their behaviours do start to change, reduce the likelihood of escalation that could cause risk to the person, family members or other people, including staff in that space. So we've structured this with 3 main areas to focus on. And the first one is digging really deeply via that CAUSE model to understand this person as intimately as we can. So thinking about the particular things that make communication possible for them, help us understand what they're saying, and that really give them the voice that they need to express that they're becoming distressed or feeling unsafe in their environment. And so we support staff to choose one of their own clients and working in a small group to go into great detail using their own documentation to find answers to a whole lot of questions, to be able to cover off all these aspects of potential triggers or potential concerns for the client that may result in them trying to express their communication in what is known as behaviour change. We realised also that knowledge doesn't necessarily translate into positive action, and there's two ways we've got to support that. One of these is to encourage staff and teach them the value in reflective practice. So thinking about the way they interact with clients or residents, and thinking about situations when that has gone really well and situations where maybe the outcome wasn't what they found comfortable or wasn't comfortable for the person. And so as part of this program, we support them to do this process of reflection. And often from this process of reflection, they come up with ideas about the fact that their organisation hasn't supported them well, or that they need more knowledge, or that they need more skills. And so we also added an aspect of this training where we look at continuous improvement. So after discussions with the organisation, we invite staff to share with us the things that they see within their organisation that is directly helping them to provide person-centred support for their people living with dementia, and also the opportunities that they need to focus on to make positive changes to be able to do this and to do it in a sustainable way. And we support staff to think about this in a really detailed way, to look at issues around not putting in these improvements and the challenges of putting in improvements, and thinking it through so that they can present to their organisation some suggestions about ways to support people with everyone on board with a person-centred approach. So the training involves a full day session to start off with, and then 3 3-hour coaching sessions where we work with staff so that they can come back with questions, develop what they would call a behaviour support plan for that individual, and also follow through on their reflective practice and their continuous improvement activities. So in doing so, we've had a whole range of responses from staff about the value for this. One of the key one is that the program is easy to understand. It's easy to implement. We're not asking them to do things that they don't think they can do. The process of reflective practice can be challenging, but is very rewarding. And the process of continuous improvement has certainly brought about some amazing changes because they've had the opportunity to share how it feels at ground level and then work through ways to change that. And sometimes this has come out of that understanding the person. So one situation was a client in a day respite centre where there was a door with a glass panel, and when the person walked up to it, they could see their reflection and they misinterpreted that as being a family member standing on the other side of the door, found it very distressing. So staff identified this as part of looking at the person in detail, but then went on to make a change to the environment, which would also have benefited other clients living with dementia by putting a non-reflective surface on the glass panel in the door. So sometimes they're fairly simple changes, but they have a profound effect on the client and on the staff too, when they're struggling to know how to respond to someone who's saying, look, so and so's on the other side of the door, what are they doing there, and becoming increasingly distressed by the situation. Sometimes what they focus on is getting to know more about the person, and through that process we've had a number of times where people have reported back that they've had a significant reduction in their serious SIRS reporting because they've finally been able to work out why it is this person has responded in such a strong and what's seen as a negative way to the situation they're living in. And there was one example with a facility where the client was someone with severe dementia, significant visual and hearing impairments, And through the process of thinking through what was going on from them, they did things like helping support them to get new hearing aids, new glasses, provided them with a magnifying glass, so that with stuff they really wanted to read, they could focus on it. And then also identifying that sitting underneath a lot of this person's distress was the fact they hadn't had contact from a family member for a long period of time. And staff initiated contact with that person, who then wrote to the client, and they printed out that letter, and it was just amazing the effect that it had, that feeling that someone still cared for them, who mattered to them. So the process brings to light so many different things, and we just really enjoy walking with staff through this process and seeing the joy for them when they get to understand someone and feel that they can make a difference without it taking lots of time necessarily. It's getting to the root of things and then sharing this throughout the facility or throughout the staffing, so that everyone is using the same approach for that person.
Thanks, Lois, and thank you particularly for the stories that you told about the residents or the clients whose lives were significantly impacted. And one of the things I particularly love is the idea that very often they're very simple changes. It's not complicated necessarily. We do need a structural way of thinking about what might be happening for the person living with dementia, what they're communicating, but it's not necessarily very difficult. So thank you very much for that quick overview, Lois, of the program. If anybody's interested in the program, one of our administrators will post a link in chat, and you can get a little bit more information about that program that Lois outlined. What I'd like to do now is just to throw to Sue Hines, who's in our control panel and has been monitoring some of the questions that have been coming through chat. Sue, is there a particular question that you'd like to tell us about?
Yeah, we've got a great question here, which encompasses a little bit of what you said, Lois. So what is your experience with how to change the culture in aged care practically and sustainably to this more meaningful approach?
Nice.
Thanks, Sue. I think key to our success has been getting staff to get into small groups and just brainstorm what's going on, what is difficult, what is challenging them, what is frustrating them. But sitting behind that, we've used that model of COVIs, where we get people to identify what they can influence and what they have less control over. So we get them started looking at organisational change where they can actually influence that, because otherwise it just creates more frustration if you identify things that are getting in the way, if you're doing person-centred support, but there's no way of making changes. And I think having that opportunity to influence and bring about change helps people see that it's possible, and it helps other people see that organisations are willing. And we've certainly been working with organisations that are incredibly willing to listen to staff and to support them to move forward. So I think it's a partnership between us and the organisation when we do this program. And, we very respectfully support staff so that they can be honest and, I guess, face their fears, face the difficulties, but then come up with a process that they can achieve.
Thanks for that response, Lois, and thanks, Sue, for the question. It really leads us very nicely into the next into our next guest and our next discussion. I'd just like to introduce Beck Waite. Beck's the project manager of specialised services dementia in-home respite with Uniting Care Blue Care, and Beck has recently undertaken this program with Lois and Sue, and we've invited her along to talk a little bit about her organisation's experience of the Understanding Behavioural Changes program. Over to you, Beck.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks for the invite to speak at the webinar event today. So I'll set the scene for everybody in regards to where we started this journey with Dementia Australia. We've probably been rolling out this training to our staff now for nearly 12 months, if not longer, with Dementia Australia. We started with, well, prior to engaging with Dementia Australia for the training, we had received feedback from both our clients and our staff, particularly our frontline staff, our care workers. So some of the feedback that entailed were things like we had received what we call staff requested do not sends. So that's where a staff member is refusing to go into a client's home because they may be afraid of that client's behaviour, or they're feeling uncomfortable in that home environment with that. They're just unsure of how to deal with that situation. We also found that the staff tended to attribute the behaviour to the dementia and then for removing that person and themselves from the equation. A little bit what like Gary was talking about earlier, where they tried so hard to fix the problem, but weren't really looking at why that person was displaying those changes in behaviour and what impact they were having on the situation. We also found that there was a lack of communication in our care plans. They were quite task-based, not very individualised, a bit nondescript really, and sometimes the staff wouldn't see the need to read a care plan, or the flip side of that, our staff weren't really understanding the need of what information needed to go into a care plan to make that visit as personalised and really increase that quality of care. We also noticed from our staff feedback, our surveys, that they had a bit of lack of confidence in their abilities and the impact that they can make on the client experience, the lack of confidence in their knowledge of strategies and triggers, etc. So there was a little bit of, as I said, that staffing component that triggered our reaching out to Dementia Australia, but also our clients as well. We'd actually ran a focus group with some of our clients living with dementia and their carers, who stressed the need that they would like staff specifically trained in dementia care delivering their services. So it was really a time for Blue Care to start investing in our staff, really. And that's when we started working with Dementia Australia in the Understanding Behaviour Changes program. Now, as you can imagine, in a community service-based program, it can be somewhat challenging to take staff off the road to attend the training. As Lois was saying, there's a full day. One of the 4 sessions is a full day session, and that can be challenging in any sort of aged care setting to take the staff out of the homes. And it is dealing with the impact that follow-on impact that has on client schedules. But we made the decision to make it a priority. We had wanted to increase our staff training because the amount of time we were spending on organising do not sends and therefore rearranging our schedules, the impact it has on our complaints and dealing with our complaints was the flip side of having our staff off the road to do the training. It really was focusing on their needs, their wants, and getting our staff upskilled to provide that better training for our clients. So I'll give you some examples now of where the staff have used that training, and in particular that caused model that is highlighted throughout those 4 training sessions. I'll give you some examples of how our staff have done it. We've actually put through the training a range of staff in the program. We have, of course, put through our personal care workers that are face-to-face with clients. We've also put through registered nurses, social workers, OTs, staff that are in our day respite centres, and we even put through some of our scheduling staff, just because, as you can appreciate, there's all these different elements of our staff that are dealing with our clients. So there was quite a range that we put through. This particular example is in regards to a client that was attending one of our day respite centres. Prior to the training, the staff had approached the coordinator, the manager, to request that a conversation be had with the client's family to discuss discharging the client from the respite centre. So they're sort of harking back to what we were talking about before, where they're just not seeing the bigger picture. They're seeing it as this client has got too hard for us to manage at the centre and we're now tapping out. The client, so to give you some examples, the client on arrival at the centre would start to become very anxious when her husband dropped her off. She'd start pacing, she'd start trying to break out of the respite centre. She'd try and, as I said, leave the door, and it was just becoming unmanageable for the staff to manage that behaviour at that day respite centre. So they saw it as a sort of, that's it, the clients reached the end of their time at the centre. So the staff actually, we put that service centre staff through the training program, and as Lois mentioned before, they are asked at the training to identify a case study. So a client that they would like to focus on as part of the program. So the staff chose this particular situation at the respite centre and started using the cause model to sort of unpack that behaviour with that client. And it encouraged the staff to rethink how they were impacting on the client at the centre. So they looked at a number of contributing factors using that cause model as a reference. So some of this entailed how the staff welcomed the client when she arrived at the centre, where she sat during the day. It also meant that they were going to check in with the client's husband prior to her arriving at the centre, just to see, you know, how was Mary that day? How was she? What was she going to be? What was happening prior to her coming to the centre? Had she had a good night? Was it a bad night? Had she had breakfast, etc.? They also wanted to, as I said, the importance of any of those underlying conditions that sometimes the centre staff aren't aware of for that client. So, and it was also like little idiosyncrasies with that client. For instance, this client was a very religious person. She actually called her Wheelie Walker Grace. And it was just finding out all those little things about that client and how could the centre staff interact with that client better and with the client's husband as well. So the new approach, once they had done that cause model in the sort of classroom setting, they then implemented that in the service centre. It had the staff feeling a lot more confident about their approach to the client, how they were interacting with the client. And actually the staff then were like quite reflective on their practices, think, you know, we don't need to be asking this client to be discharged from the centre. We've got this. It also had an impact on the client's husband as well, because the client's husband used to be so stressed that he would actually stay in the centre. So he knew that his wife was quite stressed coming into the centre as well and felt that he needed to be there to help the staff. But it actually worked in the sense that when we started communicating with the client's husband, it was more of a team approach to the care. So it resulted in his wife being a lot more settled in the centre, and therefore the husband felt less pressured to stay and actually have a break. One of the other things that came about with the program, the training, was that we have quite a lot of documentation, and sometimes asking staff to prepare a care plan for our clients can be quite daunting, because it is, where do they start? Where do they start with preparing those plans? With this particular program, it really gave the staff some tools and framework for developing those care plans. So another example that I can share is with what we call our home care package partners, which are our case managers. that deal with our home care package funded clients. And they went into this training looking at ways that they could better develop our care plans. And it really went back to what Lois was saying before about the reflective practice within the program, because it really is, it was really the staff who took it on board themselves, that after they had done the program, they were like, right, I'm going to review my care plans and I'm going to have more of a slant on the cause model when I'm writing that care plan. So they adopted a much more holistic view, a much more holistic approach to that care planning. The care plannings became much more comprehensive with client individuals, likes, conversation starters, a bit more. Client likes to run that household. We all have our own ways of how we like to run our own home. That all went into the care plan. The holistic care plans also meant that the clients felt that they were being treated as an individual and it wasn't tasked based. So we've had quite a significant reduction in amount of clients that have been contacting us saying, look, I've just told your care worker 5 times how to do something. Can't you put that in a care plan, etc. We've seen quite a reduction in that because our care plans are a lot more comprehensive and a lot more holistic now. We've also seen a reduction in our complaints. We've also seen an increase in our compliments, actually. So the compliments that have come about for those staff that have undergone the training, some of the examples are things like, I really love the way Mary, your PC, has started interacting with Mum. She just is so calm. I love her responsiveness. I love her understanding of Mum's little tendencies that she has in the home. So we've had a bit of a, as I was saying earlier, there's a bit of a flip side really of the amount of time that sometimes it can take for an organisation to put our staff through the training and the logistics of that as well, to get that number of staff members to actually attend on the day. And the flip side of that is that reduction in complaints, our reduction in time spent dealing with those complaints, and our increase in dementia. And I think going back to what the ladies were talking about in the chat before about changing that culture of an organisation, it certainly takes time, can't happen overnight. But what I really love about this training and what our staff are feeding back that they love about this training is that it is empowering them to become part of that change. Because we've put through a range of staff, as I said, RNs, case managers, PCs, they all have a part to play in that. And sometimes we don't always, as an organisation, have the time to take that aside. But I have to say that the Dementia Australia facilitators keep us in the loop throughout that training. We always have a Blue Care member on site in that training program. And some of the things that the staff come out with in terms of that reflective practice or that continuous improvement has been quite eye-opening to us, where we're thinking, well, why didn't we think of that? How come we never thought of that? So I can't speak highly enough of the program. It's just something that our staff have just picked up and ran with.
Thanks for that, Beck, and thanks. I loved the comments you made about the benefits, not just for the person living with dementia. And I think it's one of the, I don't know whether it's a criticism or a concern about person-centred care generally, that it's focused so much on the person living with dementia, which is a perfectly reasonable thing. But certainly, you know, again, harking back to Kitwood and the approach that we take at Dementia Australia, is that good person-centred practice, good person-centred problem solving benefits certainly the person with dementia, but it benefits families and loved ones and friends of the person with dementia. It benefits staff, and some of your comments about staff feeling more empowered. You know, it's difficult to keep people in aged care at the moment, but if we can make their jobs more worthwhile and give them a sense of that, I'm really making a difference here, and my problem solving skills are being respected by the organisation. but the benefits for the organisation as well in terms of longer term benefits in terms of fewer complaints, more compliments. I think some really I don't know, encouraging words that you know, training that works, mentoring that works can make a huge difference in that sort of global sense. Thanks for that, Beck. I just listening to some of the things you were saying, and you sort of alluded to this, and one of the comment you made was a little bit around the challenges that you faced as an organisation, and I'm just wondering if you can say just a little bit more about how you as an organisation responded to those very practical challenges of providing training. And if I can throw in another little question at the end of that, is I'm really interested in sustainability of training, and I'm wondering how Blue Care have gone about supporting the ongoing practice of problem solving or the caused approach.
Yes, I'll start with that last bit first there, because what we've done is, as I mentioned, we have our dementia care consultants, so they're Blue Care staff, attend the training sessions with Dementia Australia. From that, the dementia care consultants then have regular catch-up meetings, specifically with our care staff, in terms of how they are adapting that model out in the community. And they're a little bit like a debriefing session that they have with the dementia care consultants. So they can bring their own case study to that meeting. It's again with a group of PCs that have gone through the training, so they can bring more case studies to those staff meetings, but mainly debriefing sessions, and keep using that cause model throughout. So it's something that I suppose it's a bit like a relay race. Dementia Australia has started the race. They've started the running down. And then when that stops, it's that baton is handed over to us to keep sort of reinforcing that, really, particularly around our care planning and also that reflective practice. So we do that on a regular basis with our PCs and with our package partners who are writing our care plans, where they keep bringing those case studies to those meetings to keep utilising that cause model. Now, your other question you had there, Gary, yes, there's been some sleepless nights, because when we started with Dementia Australia, we were just coming out of the COVID, the COVID wave. I think there was a wave. I'm not too sure. I was probably drowned in the wave, I think. But there was a COVID wave. So the amount of pressure that we've been under as an organisation, because we've got, as I said, we've had COVID that we've dealt with when we started the program. We also are short-staffed because of the nature of aged care at the moment. And it was, you know, you go through just your normal sort of sick leave, unplanned leave as a course of rostering services. So it was getting everybody on board with the training. We had, and I think Lois may have mentioned it, prior to us, or prior to Dementia Australia delivering the training, we did have a sort of like a staff meeting, I suppose, with Dementia Australia and with our care managers to talk about what we wanted to achieve out of the training, and have that as a priority for our strategic plan, really. In terms of the practicalities of that, it was working with our scheduling teams, being quite agile, and it may mean that someone that we had enrolled on the program, for whatever reason at last minute, could not attend that program. And we had to be quite agile as to have either, depending on the numbers of who we had scheduled, it might be that we had another staff meeting go in, and Dementia Australia worked with us really well in that. So it was having our scheduling quite agile in the sense that we were able to move quite quickly to make sure that those numbers came up in terms of meeting the requirements for the training, but also just making it a priority. So we utilised all of our staff to make sure that if we're getting those staff off the road, then we had somebody else to go in to provide that care. Might also mean, because we're in community, it might also mean communicating with our clients. We were quite upfront with our clients in terms of the partnership that we had with Dementia Australia and the training that they would be receiving, and had conversations with clients in terms of, you know, can we move your service to another day, another time? So it really was just communication, really, that got us through it. And continues.
Yeah, indeed. And look, Beck, I think that really highlights that sort of old adage in training that if we want to achieve genuine and sustainable cultural change within an organisation, education is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Putting staff just through some education programs in itself is not enough, that the organisation needs to make a commitment to rowing the hard rows, I suppose, with that, implementing those changes.
And that's probably why we put in the debriefing staff meeting with our dementia care coordinators and particularly our PCs. Because, as I was saying, Dementia Australia come in and do an absolutely fabulous job of empowering the staff and getting them so excited about the program and about the changes that they can make. We didn't want that to burn out, and we wanted to make sure that their line managers were also seen to have that enthusiasm. Because it's one thing if they're going to a training, and I tell you, you know, Lois and Sue, the amount of feedback I've just got with you two has been overwhelming. If I could give you a compliment in Wristman, I would. But they also, like, our staff also need to make sure that our care coordinators, our care managers and higher up also have that enthusiasm and follow through. And that's what's prompted us to put in those debriefing sessions, particularly with our PCs, because in a community setting, they can feel quite isolated and on their own out there. And we also wanted to recognise their contribution to the client care. And really the amount of time that we spend on those debriefing sessions, the flip side is that is our retention numbers, because recruitment is just such an ongoing train ride that once we have our staff, we need to really keep them. So we needed to, as you said, Gary, we needed to provide that professional development in terms of the training, but follow that through with a mentoring system within our organisation.
Lois, there might be there's a question here for you, I suppose, is that not all organisations are in the right place to be able to provide that ongoing support for cultural change. But we often hear back from participants in programs like the Understanding Behaviour Changes that even if the organisation is not quite there yet, there are benefits for individual staff members as well. I'm just wondering if you could make any comments about that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Gary. I think by helping people view their clients, their residents in a different way, so that when they support them, they're treating them as whole people with you know, communication to hear, with feedback, and that their focus is on supporting them to live the best life they can. If what our training brings about is that change or understanding, or supports people to go back and keep going with that belief, it causes a ripple effect, I believe, which then will affect the organisation. It's a slower way of making change, but it does bring about change. And, you know, we've heard that from staff who've said to us, look, as a result of this, I realise I can make a difference by actually changing the way I write my care plans, changing the way I write my behaviour support plans, just spending the time talking to somebody and focusing on them first before I go into showering them or whatever it is that my role involves. So, and I think the beauty of this program is that people are in the room with other staff. They may not have had the luxury of sitting down and actually sharing their knowledge about the same person. So that gives them colleagues at work who get it, who they can go back to and talk about. And there's other people who are trying to move forward in the same way that they are. But ideally, we need organisational support to really make this happen in a way that people don't become frustrated and vote with their feet.
Thanks, Lois. I'm just aware of the time. Sue, do we have any other questions from our audience?
Yeah, one which I think is one that probably crops up a lot, and maybe Lois, you could answer that in regards to the cause model a little bit, is how do we stop the practice of medication restraint? And how is the programme helping in regards to that?
That's another program.
That's right.
I know, another huge question.
Thanks, Sue. That's a good one. I think the more you understand someone, the more, as Gary's, told us right at the beginning, the more we can interpret the way they are responding to the situation they're in and the way they're demonstrating that they don't feel safe in it. So therefore, the less likely it is that they're going to be doing things that make us think that chemicals are the best way of stopping what's happening. But I know that the problem, the tyranny of lack of time, lack of staff often raises its head. But if in the moment, every interaction brings safety and helps that person feel that they're connected, then, and everyone is doing that in the same way, I believe that will reduce that overall response to the situation that becomes a risk, something that will cause risk to that person or other people in the situation. So I can't sort of, I need a day to tell you more, but that's just my summary.
And of course, sometimes medications and a medical approach is the most appropriate approach. I think what we're saying is that it's not one or the other, but that we really need to bring attention to the person and their whole life situation. Sue, I think we've probably got just enough time for one more question if there's one more.
Yeah, I might put this one to Beck if that's possible. So someone's mentioned that we really require educated and qualified leaders who excel in dementia care, which obviously you've touched on. How do you feel you've done that within your organisation?
Well, we've done a few things. We have got our dementia care consultant model, which we're rolling out across the state. And that actually supports a number of levels of staff, so that supports our care workers as well as our care coordinators. It's primarily client focused, so it supports our clients in the communities. But we did know that you can't, and it's probably where this question is coming from, you can't provide quality dementia care to our clients if you don't actually have the staff within your organisation to do it. So we did start firstly with our dementia care consultants. That was probably the first step on our journey with the dementia program. We did that maybe about 2 years ago, I think it was. Then that person who has specific dementia qualifications has then started to support the wider organisation. And then the next sort of step was getting in organisations such as Dementia Australia to widen that sort of skill-based really within Blue Care.
Thanks for that, Beck. I think we've just got a couple of minutes. Lois, did you want to make any quick comments about the importance of leadership within organisations when we're trying to make those cultural changes? You've got 1 minute.
The only thing I can say is that you need leaders who are passionate, who believe that person-centred support of people living with dementia is the only way to move forward, but also who are very person-centred in response to their staffing and their needs too, because it's that combination of understanding your staff and supporting them so that they can understand and support the clients that really makes things happen.
Thank you. Thanks. Look, I think we're unfortunately just about run out of time, and thank you all for a very stimulating conversation. And again, we find with all of these webinars that we start one topic and we can see ourselves veering off into something else, and we could spend all day discussing some of these issues. But just to finish, I'd really like to thank Beck for taking the time out to share your and your organisation's experiences today. To Lois as well for sharing her insights into the program, and she's had a vast experience rolling out the program as well. To Sue in the background, was trolling through the very many questions that we received from the audience. I'd also just quickly like to thank also behind the scenes Jim and Taylor for pushing the pedals in the background. Particularly, just as a final point, I'd like to thank you, the people who are in the audience, and thank you from the bottom of my heart, and certainly the heart of Dementia Australia as a whole, for the extraordinary work that we know you do every single day, supporting people living with dementia to live their best lives possible. It's not always easy, but we couldn't do what we do if we didn't have you doing what you do. So again, thank you very, very much for that hard work. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next webinar. Bye.